the Russians' objectives have been very clearly articulated in very simple terms so that like a 4-year-old can understand it. The fact that Europeans are always coming up with these non-solutions is because they don't want the war to end. It's that simple. So they come up with peace proposals that they already know that the Russians will reject. And so Vladimir Putin says, if we can't come to an agreement, well, we're going to achieve our objective by military means. This is exactly what the Europeans want. They want the war to continue.
That's a hard statement, but it reflects something many people quietly sense. When peace proposals are designed to fail, it suggests the goal isn't resolution, it's prolongation. Historically, this is how proxy conflicts work. During the Cold War, wars dragged on not because they couldn't be stopped, but because stopping them didn't serve strategic interests. From a human perspective, that's deeply troubling. Wars should end when diplomacy becomes possible, not be extended because powerful actors find them useful.
You know, when the war started in 2022, under the British Defense Department, they formed a team which was codenamed Project Alchemy. And they produced a document, like a strategy document, in which the main theme was that they have to keep Ukraine fighting. At whatever cost, they have to keep Ukraine fighting. So no peace, no agreements, no negotiations, war. And it seems to me very obvious that this is exactly what they're doing, and they're continuing to do it. And then you have, European diplomats who have basically broken off their relationship with Russia. You have European Union's chief diplomat Kaja Kallas, who is explicitly saying, oh, we're reaching out to all these countries and we're trying to persuade them not to engage with the Russians. I mean, if that's your head diplomat, you know that you're in a lot of trouble. But if you're refusing diplomacy, that means that your only one objective is war.
That's a very important line. Diplomacy isn't a weakness. It's how serious states avoid catastrophe. When diplomats cut off dialogue entirely, history shows it usually precedes escalation, not stability. It also removes off-ramps, and once those are gone, events start running faster than leaders can control.
And they even know that they can't win that war. They understand that. They want to keep it going for a number of reasons, because for as long as the war is going on, they think that they are weakening Russia and that they can eventually somehow destabilize Russia by whatever means. And then also it's hugely profitable, because for as long as war is going on, they can justify all these hundreds of billions that they're pouring into Ukraine, a lot of which is being laundered back to them for this and that contract, commission, whatever they collect. And so they all have a vested interest that this gravy train keeps rolling.
This is where uncomfortable truths enter the conversation. Wars don't just have strategic dimensions, they create economic ecosystems. Defense contracts, reconstruction money, commissions, all of it creates incentives that have nothing to do with peace. That doesn't mean everyone is corrupt, but it does mean the system itself rewards continuation, not resolution.
There are two big players in this equation, and that's Russia and the United States. Now, the Americans perfectly understand what Russian security concerns are, like everybody else does. And I think that the Trump administration, unlike the Europeans, have a certain respect for that. And that they have been trying to establish good, constructive relations with the Russians. But they also understand that if peace negotiations are sabotaged, that the Russians are going to achieve their objectives by force. So they said, okay, fine, Europeans, you want to have it that way, have it your way. But, it's going to end up in Russian favor anyway.
That assessment aligns with what many analysts are now saying quietly. Military realities tend to assert themselves over time, regardless of political narratives. When policy ignores battlefield realities, it usually leads to worse outcomes later. That's not taking sides. That's acknowledging limits.
So I think that the Trump administration is not that keen on bringing Europe on board because they know that the Russians are going to prevail one way or another. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter to the United States from their security point of view. And so all of these plans and agreements and schemes that they are contriving are not going to go anywhere because, they're talking about putting their troops on the ground once the peace is concluded. Well, the peace won't be concluded. And when it does get concluded at some point in the future, it's going to be between the Russians and the government in Kiev, whoever that's going to be. And it's going to be concluded with the Americans. And then there's going to be a change in Kiev. And so, they will not be, if a new government in Kiev, a future one that will happen after the next elections, whenever they happen, if that government is favorable to Moscow, if it comes back into Russian orbit, they're not going to allow French and British and German troops on Ukraine's territory. They can only do this if they achieve peace and they keep Zelensky in power, or somebody like Zelensky who is going to remain loyal to them. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I think that, you have two strong players, Russia and the United States, and then you have a handful of very, very weak players who are out of money, out of weapons.
You ever notice how two headlines can describe the same event and yet leave you with completely different impressions? That's not an accident. It's narrative, shaped by media bias. We can't eliminate it, but we can compare how different outlets frame the same story. That's where ground news comes in. It's not a news outlet. It's a tool that shows how major sources across the political spectrum cover the same event. Left, right, and everything in between. Take this story. Putin and U.S. envoys hold 5-hour talks with no territory compromise. Ground News shows that over 400 sources reported on this story and lets you see how factual each source is, which is based on two trusted rating systems, Ad Fontes Media and Media Bias Fact Check. Their bias comparison feature gives a very useful summary of the left and right are framing the story. Left-leaning outlets highlight that the talks are not bringing us closer to peace and questions the envoy's legitimacy, saying it's corrupt or unconstitutional, while right-leaning outlets underscore Trump's envoy's involvement and frame Putin as arrogant. Ground News makes it easy for you to compare all sides of the story so you can see the full picture and make your own judgment. If you want the ability to think freely about the news, subscribe using my link ground.news/unfiltered in the description, or scan the QR code on screen to get 40% off the Vantage plan, the same one I'm using. I highly encourage you to do so.
We have no militaries of any respectable size, and who are also extremely unpopular with their own domestic constituencies. So I think they're not going to last long. Merz, Macron, Starmer, they're not going to be in power for very much longer. And I have reasons to believe that people in the Trump administration know that, and that they will actually help their opposition to come in power and form new governments. And then, everything changes. The reason why I think so is because when was it? 2 weeks ago, when Kushner and Witkoff were in Moscow and spent 5 hours discussing things with Vladimir Putin, we learned that one of the things that they were discussing was reconnecting Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany. Well, if they were having that discussion without any representative of the German government there, that tells me that the American government is already counting on a regime change in Germany. That, so that Friedrich Merz to them is irrelevant. So he can talk what he wants. He can vote for whatever peace agreement he wants. He can lobby, but ultimately it's not going to amount to much.
That's a sober conclusion. When major decisions are being discussed without certain governments even in the room, it signals shifting power realities. History shows that peace settlements are usually decided by those who can enforce them, not those issuing statements.
Zelensky is an obstacle, and we have to remember that Zelensky is very probably a British agent. After he got elected in 2019, one of the first trips he took was to London. And in October of 2019, he went for a meeting, not with the British Prime Minister, who I think at the time was Boris Johnson. He went for a 2-hour meeting with Sir Richard Moore, who was the head of MI6. That's very unusual. That's very strange. But it's very indicative that he spent time talking to the chief of the British Foreign Intelligence Agency. And we don't know what they discussed. I mean, Zelensky got caught. It was the Ukrainian media who broke this story. And then Zelensky said, oh, yes, we were talking about peace and stability for Ukraine, blah, 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 let's say the publicly acceptable justifications. But still, you should have talked to maybe British Prime Minister or maybe their head of their foreign office or cabinet meeting with the defense ministers for that. Not MI6. That's British foreign intelligence.
Whether one agrees with this interpretation or not, it highlights a broader issue. When intelligence agencies become deeply entangled in political leadership, transparency erodes. Democracies depend on civilian accountability. Once that line blurs, public trust usually collapses.
So he has his... It's British intelligence who concocted this Project Alchemy that says, keep Ukraine fighting at all costs. That's his task. That is his assignment. Keeping Ukraine fighting at all costs. And so, of course, he's protected from the, let's say, democratic will of the Ukrainian people by a Praetorian Guard, which I understand are also British mercenaries. Although, I don't know that for sure, that's just kind of one of those stories that's going around. But for sure, he's protected, because otherwise he would end up like Mussolini. Like the people would tear him apart if they could, but they can't.
That imagery is stark, but the underlying point is about legitimacy. Leaders ultimately survive on consent, not protection. When public will and political authority diverge too far, history shows the system eventually corrects, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not.
The problem for the people in power today is that they're losing control of the narrative. And this is everything to them, because, it was the last year at Davos, you had Ursula von der Leyen and John Kerry and a number of these people who were pretty much having like a senior tantrum about misinformation and disinformation. And I think that Ursula von der Leyen even said that misinformation and disinformation is now a greater threat to them even than Russia and the international terrorism.
That statement reveals anxiety more than confidence. When leaders fear open debate, it often means their narratives are weakening. Information control has always been a sign of fragility, not strength, from empires of the past to modern states today.
So this is a huge problem for them. And I think that Colonel Jacques Beau has been one of the clearest voices out there for truth, to explain to people what is going on, what is true, what is false. And I think that he has a certain authority because he used to work for NATO. He used to be involved in many of these crisis points around the world. So he has a certain experience and knowledge and authority. So his voice counted very, very much. I think we all learned a great deal from Jacques Beau. And so they decided to silence him. And so, they sanctioned him to make it, impossible for his voice to be heard. Well, that the same thing in the end, it's going to come back and it's going to boomerang, I think, because now people realize if you didn't know about Jacques Beau before, now maybe you're going to find out. And then people, like every time you ban something, it's like that Streisand effect,
Yeah.
that now people are curious, like, okay, so what was he saying that they went so hard against him and silenced him? Same as when they fired Tucker Carlson from Fox News. Did they silence him? Not really. I think it's even gotten worse for them. And so I think that
you have the same case with Candace Owens.
Exactly. There you have it. And so I think that this is something very, very important, because what it tells us is that we are winning, we meaning ordinary people who want to know the truth and who want to discover the truth. Nobody likes to be lied to. And especially when they tell you, oh, you're going to have to sacrifice your children.
Yeah.
And you're lying to me about why I have to sacrifice your children? I don't think so. And so, I think that they are desperate. They don't know what to do. The knee-jerk reaction is to silence the voices who are sharing the inconvenient truth. But I think that in the end, it's going to be counterproductive. It's going to result with a lot of unintended consequences and opposite outcomes.
That may be the most important takeaway. Attempts to silence dissent rarely work. They usually backfire. We've seen this repeatedly, whether with journalists, analysts, or public figures. People don't like being told what they're allowed to question. And when sacrifice is demanded without honesty, resistance naturally follows. In the long run, truth has a way of resurfacing, not because it's powerful, but because reality always wins.